US Federal Reserve raises its benchmark interest rates by 75 basis points for the second straight month in its bid to fight inflation. But there are fears that a slowing economy will soon trigger a recession in the country. The so-called doubling of COVID-19 cases continues, with the spread of a more infectious Omicron subvariant. Over 100,000 daily cases are reported in South Korea on Wednesday for the first time since late April. A wall to forever remember the sacrifices made in the Korean War. With the names of over 43,000 Americans and South Koreans who served in the war, the new Korean War monument is unveiled at a ceremony in Washington, D.C.
Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. For the second straight month, the U.S. Federal Reserve has hiked its benchmark interest rates by 3/4 of a percentage point, the most aggressive monetary tightening in more than a generation.
The move is very much aimed at clamping down on inflation levels unseen in 40 years. And the impact of the decision will be felt beyond just the United States, as countries around the world will also have to follow the Fed's lead, including South Korea, which is expected to maintain its monetary tightening policies. Ji-young starts us off.
The U.S. Federal Reserve raised its benchmark overnight interest rates by 3/4 of a percentage point for a second straight meeting. At the end of its two-day policy meeting on Wednesday, the Federal Open Market Committee announced its largest back-to-back rate increase. The adjustment brings the cumulative June to July raise to 150 basis points, which is the most aggressive tightening since 1981. The short-term borrowing rates now stand between 2.25% and 2.5%, similar to levels in 2019. The decision, despite risking a sharp hit to the economy, was unanimously agreed upon by voting members of the FOMC to crush inflation, which is running at rates unseen in 4 decades.
Our overarching focus is using our tools to bring demand into better balance with supply, in order to bring inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored.
Powell said that this process is likely to involve a period of below-trend economic growth and some softening in labor market conditions, but added he does not think the U.S. economy is currently in a recession.
There are just too many areas of the economy that are performing, too well. And of course, I would point to the labor market in particular. As I mentioned, it's true that growth is slowing, and for reasons that we understand, really the growth was extraordinarily high last year, 5.5%. We would have expected growth to slow.
He also signaled a possible third hike, saying the Fed anticipates that ongoing increases in the target range will be appropriate. The Fed's aggressive monetary tightening also has global repercussions. The U.S. interest rates have surpassed those of South Korea for the first time in 2.5 years, which could lead to capital outflows from South Korea. To prevent this and to curb soaring inflation in the country, the Bank of Korea said it is likely to maintain its monetary tightening policies after taking the so-called big step of a 50 basis point increase earlier this month.
It is desirable to gradually raise interest rates by 25 basis points for a while.
However, an expert says, although it could help stabilize prices, there could be side effects from the big step.
Household and corporate debt have been accumulating since before the COVID-19 pandemic economic crisis. With mounting debt, private spending could go down. Also, it could lead to further polarization of society, as those in low-income groups are likely to be hit harder.
Ji-young, Arirang News.
Business sentiment among South Korean companies fell in July for a second month in a row. The Bank of Korea said on Thursday that the business sentiment index for all industries this month stands at 80 points, down 2.2 points from June. A reading below 100 means that the overall mood is pessimistic. The BOK attributed the fall to soaring commodity prices amid high inflation and concerns of an economic slowdown with continued rate hikes around the world. Both manufacturing and non-manufacturing sectors were hit, and the bank said that demand in both sectors dropped due to worries over a recession. President Yoon intends to grow the country's biohealth industry into one of South Korea's key strategic sectors. Now, that was very much the focal point of his weekly emergency economic meeting held Wednesday. Our Yoon Jung-min tells us more.
South Korea will nurture its biohealth sector to develop it into one of the nation's core strategic industries. That's President Yoon as he toured the Healthcare Innovation Park at Seoul National University Pundang Hospital just south of Seoul on Wednesday.
정부는 바이오 헬스 산업을 국가 핵심 전략 산업으로 육성할 계획을 가지고 있습니다. K-바이오 백신 펀드를 조성하는 등 금융 지원 역시 확대해서 기업들이 블록버스터 신약과 백신 개발에 전념할 수 있도록 지원하겠습니다.
That will require cutting red tape to speed up approvals for AI-applied and digitally innovative medical devices.
바이오 헬스 분야의 신산업 영역의 규제 혁신 방향을 우선 제시해서 시장에서 예측 가능성을 높이고 혁신적인 기술이 상용화될 수 있도록 지원하겠습니다.
The president's top economic aide said Yoon called for the need of biohealth clusters similar to the biotech hub in the greater Boston area.
The government plans to focus on fostering biohealth infrastructure, including regulatory innovation, raising manpower, and supporting R&D. We will provide supporting finance, tax, location, and licensing to ensure private investment worth 13 trillion Korean won implemented as planned.
Greater Boston is home to more than 1,000 biotechnology companies ranging from small startups to billion-dollar pharmaceutical firms, and its proximity to leading academic institutions give the region a large network of scientists and access to generous public and private funding. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The unveiling ceremony for the Wall of Remembrance, which features names of some 43,000 soldiers killed during the Korean War, was held in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, marking the 69th anniversary of the signing of the Korean War Armistice Agreement. Kim Yo-sun has the full details.
A new Korean War monument with the names of fallen heroes inscribed upon it was unveiled in Washington on Wednesday. The dedication of the Wall of Remembrance was marked by a ceremony that brought together some 3,000 people, including government officials, Korean War veterans, as well as their families from both South Korea and the U.S. The wall bears the names of over 43,000 service members from South Korea and America who were killed during the war. During the ceremony, a message from South Korean President Yoon was read by Minister of Veterans Affairs Kang Min-sik on his behalf.
Korean War veterans, you are the guardians of freedom and true heroes who protected the Republic of Korea.
The message stressed that the new monument represents the solidarity of the ROK-US alliance, adding that the sacrifices of the fallen heroes will be forever remembered. Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff joined the ceremony on behalf of President Joe Biden, who was diagnosed with COVID-19 late last week.
It's a poignant reminder of the individual sacrifices of the more than 36,000 U.S. service members and the more than 7,000 Korean troops who served together and died together in Korea.
Family members of Korean War veterans were also in Washington to see the names of their relatives.
They always called the Korean War the Forgotten War, and I think this helps to dispel some of that.
The construction of the wall cost $22 million and was funded by donations from Korean and American organizations and private donors. Building began in March 2021, with the wall officially unveiled during Wednesday's dedication ceremony. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Indonesian President Joko Widodo, who is currently in Seoul, will take part in a summit with President Yoon later on Thursday. On the agenda is the issue of Indonesia contributing its share of the cost of developing Korea's KF-21 fighter jet, which remains unpaid. President Widodo will also meet with the chairman of Hyundai Motor Group, Chung Hee-sun, as well as business leaders from other companies, including Samsung, SK, and LG. He is also set to visit the research center of Hyundai Motor. His trip to Seoul is part of a regional tour to 3 countries, including China and Japan. Poland secured a framework agreement on purchasing South Korean weapon systems. This includes buying 48 F-A-50s, 980 K2 Black Panther tanks, and 648 K9 self-propelled howitzers. At the signing ceremony in Poland on Wednesday, local time, the country's defense chief said Poland needs to replace equipment it donated to Ukraine, and Korean weapon systems were the right fit. Although the value of the deal is not yet confirmed, it's expected to be Seoul's single biggest weapons export pact to date. Victoria Nuland, the U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, held a meeting with senior South Korean officials. They mainly held discussions on several regional and global issues, including North Korea. Min Suk-hyun has the details.
The U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland, who now is in Seoul, met with First Vice Foreign Minister Cho Hyun-dong on Wednesday. The two discussed a wide range of issues, including the security situation on the Korean peninsula. Both sides shared the view that North Korea's nuclear missile threats remain an urgent task that needs to be dealt with. With that in mind, they agreed to keep the door open for dialogue with Pyongyang and carry out a flexible approach in their diplomacy with the regime. But in the event of a North Korean provocation, they plan to work closely to ensure a strong, unified response from the international community. On the Seoul-Washington alliance, Cho and Nuland hope to swiftly hold their extended deterrence dialogue and agree to work on what they call their new Global Comprehensive Strategic Alliance. The two sides also agreed to expand cooperation on key issues such as global supply chains and climate change. Later in the day, Nuland also met with Seoul's top nuclear envoy, Kim Gun, to discuss plans for North Korea's denuclearization. At their meeting, the two are expected to have discussed South Korea's bold plans, which includes economic incentives in line with North's efforts to denuclearize. The senior U.S. diplomat arrived in Seoul on Tuesday for a 3-day trip after shortly visiting Tokyo early this week. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. South Korea is just a week away from launching the Korea Pathfinder Lunar Orbiter, also known as KPLO. The craft will be launched from Cape Canaveral in the U.S. on August 2nd with the help of NASA. The mission was developed and managed by the Korea Aerospace Research Institute for a year-long orbit of the moon.
And this year, with the second launch of Nuri, South Korea is taking bold but baby steps in the aerospace industry. So what does this project signify, and why does the country want to study the far side of the moon? For more, we have Kang Sung-ju, Research Officer for Astronomy and Space Team at the Gwacheon National Science Museum. Very good morning to you, Dr. Kang. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
And, well, our first question is, well, because the launch is being carried out by NASA, but the project is very much Korean, to what extent is this a Korean project, and what are you looking forward to the most?
Okay, honestly speaking, we can say that whole mission is developed and managed by Korean government-supported research institutes such as KARI or KASI and other universities in Korea. However, despite the Nuri's successful launch in June, current Nuri's specification does not have the capability to lift the payload beyond the low Earth orbit yet. Since this mission is heading to the moon, we need to get help by the NASA and SpaceX using Falcon 9 launch vehicle to be in the orbit to the moon.
Right, so we are going to send an orbiter to the moon, but what can we really learn from this mission? Why do we want to study the moon?
This mission is Korea's first mission to explore the moon and deep space as well. If KPLO, as known as Danuriho, launch is successful, it means that Korea will join the leading group of space development in line with the other global trend of the deep space exploration. The moon can play a very important role as an intermediate base for deep space exploration, and there are many rare resources on Earth that are lacking. Therefore, sharing the value of lunar exploration with researchers around the world is why we go to the moon, and we should go to the moon.
And while some say that we are a little bit late in the game, but how advanced is the technology behind KPLO when you compare it to other countries that are very much established in the space industry?
KPLO has many observational and experimental instruments in it. As comparing to other countries, these devices are extremely sophisticated. It has a high-resolution camera used to select the lunar landings for the future, a polarization camera for accurate observation of the lunar surface, and gamma ray meter for resource presence on the moon, and so on. So all these observations with these devices never done before. So many countries are paying attention to Korea's moon exploration right now.
Right. And now we are working with NASA in terms of the delivery of the KPLO, but we saw the successful launch of Nuri last month. So, and the point of the launch was to be independent in the aerospace industry. So when do you think South Korea can launch a satellite into the space as far as the moon?
Okay, as mentioned earlier, with the success of Nuri's launch vehicle, Korea, in June, Korea now has the ability to launch satellite on its own to the low Earth orbit. As far as I know, we are working on developing a launch vehicle for deep space exploration for the next step. And it is important to upgrade its performance step by step rather than hurrying it up. In the 2030s, I believe, inside of the next 10 years, we expect to be able to use our launch vehicle to send our lunar probes and lunar landers.
Dr. Kang, so what kind of commercial opportunities do you see for this technology going forward?
Probably those are very sophisticated internet instruments. So I think there will be very advanced instrument and will be used for the future moon exploration.
Oh, and in what ways is South Korea's project really helping the global effort to advance space missions and space research?
Can you say that again one more time?
In what ways does KPLO really contribute to the very global effort to advance space tech and space explorations?
There are many first observation and experimental will be done by the KPLO, such as PolCam with looking for the lunar surface with the polarization camera, as never done before. So that kind of the information will be given to Earth for the first time. And we will going to use the deep space internet as well, and this is a first time experiment as well. So these are high advanced technology will contribute for the future moon exploration, as well as the characteristic and properties of the moon for the future exploration.
Right, and we know from previous announcements from the government that South Korea is on its way to have a manned mission on the moon. So the country is trying to land an astronaut on the moon. How is this going to help that if we can study the moon for a year before that?
Okay, so studying the moon is very important, and that's why a lot of countries are try to go to the moon again since after 1960s, 70s. Since then, so exploring the moon is very helpful for try to go to the deep space exploration. So everybody wants to go to the deep space. That's the national global trend for right now. So we are on the baby step for the deep space exploration. This is our first step. So Korea Pathfinder Lunar Orbiter, which is KPLO, the Arirang, will open our deep space exploration mission for the future. And later, based on this assets, we will continue to the deep space exploration, and we will be the very important role and be part of the global deep space exploration.
Right, so baby steps, but we do know that South Korea is very proficient at catching up, so we look forward to a lot of exciting space developments. Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Kang, for your time. It's always lovely to have you on our show, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Now that wraps up the first half of New Day at Arirang, but stay with us because coming up in the second half we cover
the US Fed's decision to raise the interest rate for the second straight month. And while the series of rate hikes seem to be kicking in, there are still some concerns of an impending recession. We delve into this with an expert's analysis, so don't go away. We'll be back soon, just after the break.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean New Day. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
Feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back to New Day at Arirang. South Korea's new daily COVID-19 tally surpassed the 100,000 mark for the first time in over 3 months on Wednesday.
The grim milestone comes as the country grapples with the latest resurgence of the virus caused by the Omicron variant. Meanwhile, statistical data shows that South Korea logged the highest May deaths since records began this year. The number of deaths totaled almost 29,000 in May, up 12.8% the year before. In addition, the number of newborns dipped to a record low of around 20,000 for the same month, down 8.8% on year. With deaths outpacing births, the country's population decreased by nearly 8,800 in May, marking the 31st straight month of decline. At the National Assembly, lawmakers grilled government officials from the education, culture and social sectors. The biggest topics included the new police bureau and whether the latest COVID-19 prevention measures have been working. Kim Bo-kyung has more from day 3 of the Parliament's questioning session.
Day 3 of the National Assembly interpellation focused on social issues and the education and culture sectors. There was fierce debate on the Interior Ministry's new police bureau. The enforcement decree was passed on Tuesday, allowing the ministry to have more control over the police, including any personnel appointments. Addressing concerns that it will hinder police neutrality, Interior Minister Lee Sang-min said the aim is to improve transparency, as before the work had been done by the now-defunct Senior Presidential Secretary for Civil Affairs Office. And regarding concerns over the minister having direct investigative control over the police, he said that will not happen.
This is why more than 80% of the bureau will be made up of current police officers. They will handle the work by themselves. If I do anything that's outside the boundary of the authority that I promised, it would become a problem right away.
Another hotly debated topic was tackling COVID-19. Lawmakers asked whether the Yoon administration's science-based measures are working and whether reducing financial support for those infected is the right thing to do. South Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said that the situation the country is facing is better with vaccines and medicines, and that the funds should be used when the situation gets worse.
If people get vaccinated and adhere to personal hygiene measures, experts say it is unlikely that things will become aggravated. Financial aid is being reduced at a time when the situation is stabilized, to save funds for later use if it worsens.
The head of the Education Ministry, who was appointed without a parliamentary confirmation process, was grilled not only on certain personal issues, but also on the plans to nurture 150,000 new experts in the semiconductor industry. The government plans to do this by easing student quotas at universities regardless of region, which has sparked a backlash from universities outside the Greater Seoul area, worried that with eased quotas, they will get fewer students. The very first interpellation session since Yoon administration took office ended on Wednesday after 3 days of questioning. Though some hot topics were addressed, controversial issues will be debated further by parliamentary committees. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The EU approved a proposal to voluntarily cut its gas usage to reduce energy dependence on Russia. The White House dispatched its presidential coordinator for global energy to Europe. Lee Si-hoo has the latest.
On Tuesday, European Union energy ministers approved a proposal for all EU countries to voluntarily cut gas use by 15% from August until March 2023. That is, to reduce its dependence on Russian energy supplies.
The impact on the GDP will be significantly smaller if we start saving now and don't wait until Russia forces us to do so.
The approved proposal is a lighter version of the one previously put forward by the Commission. The initial plan involved imposing a binding 15% cut on every country, but the current agreement includes exemptions for certain countries and industries depending on certain factors such as the amount of energy stored and their energy needs. The agreement comes after Russia's state-owned gas company Gazprom on Monday said it would cut the supply through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to Germany in half to just 20% of its capacity. Gazprom has blamed the reductions on repairs to the pipeline, but some EU and US officials have said the move was a retaliation to Western sanctions against Russia. In response to the turmoil, according to CNN, the White House dispatched Presidential Coordinator for Global Energy Amos Hochstein to Europe on Tuesday. He will travel to Paris and Brussels to discuss contingency planning with the US-EU Energy Task Force that was created in March. Meanwhile, also according to CNN on Tuesday, a spokesperson for the UN Secretary General said that the first shipment of Ukrainian grain under the Black Sea deal, brokered by the UN and Turkey, is expected to move within a few days. Through the deal, grain exports are able to resume from 3 Ukrainian ports. This comes despite Russian strikes on the Ukrainian port of Odessa just a day after the agreement was reached. Turkey's Ministry of Defense also announced on Tuesday the opening of what's called a Joint Coordination Center for Ukrainian grain exports. The center is to oversee the transport of vital grain exports out of Ukraine. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
It's now time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. On Wednesday, the US Federal Reserve raised its benchmark interest rate by an additional 0.75 of a percentage point. Now, this is the 4th time that the central bank has raised rates this year, amid record high inflation of 9.1% in June, which is the highest in 4 decades. With monetary tightening at a much faster pace than previously expected, various indicators such as property sales and a falling stock market are leading to hope that aggressive tightening has been slowing the economy down. But has it been working all too well to the point of a very imminent recession? And what about the South Korean economy, which has also been experiencing surging price levels and rate hikes? For this, we invite Randall Krosner, Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and Professor Kim Se-wan, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Very warm welcome to you both. And my first question to you, Professor Krosner. Now, it seems that Fed is trying to dampen demand as supply-side factors such as the supply chain issues that we're experiencing and the war in Ukraine, of course, they seem to be slightly beyond the Fed's control. So do you think this aggressive pace of rate hikes has been working? And do you agree with its latest decision to raise rates?
Yes, I agree with this decision. I think it's very important that the Fed make sure that inflation expectations do not become unanchored and get out of control. That's what happened in the late 1970s, early 1980s in the U.S., the last time inflation was this high 40 years ago, and the Fed had to raise rates to double-digit levels. Now, hopefully, they can raise rates just 4% or so, and the inflation will come down. And that's why it's very important that they act aggressively and act now. Even if they are not the source of all of the price pressures, they own it. They are the central bank, and they're the ones who have to deal with the inflation.
And Professor Kim, there have been growing concerns about a possible recession. Some people think we're already in a recession. And addressing these concerns, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, she said that the US economy is in a, quote, period of transition in which growth is slowing, but not yet in a recession. So what's your point of view? And at what point would you call it a recession?
Well, Ms. Yellen has a strong incentive to say no to recession possibility as U.S. Finance Secretary because people are affected by her speech. But she acknowledges that U.S. economy is slowing down. Recently, she said that there is a path to avoid a recession in a news interview. And as an evidence against recession, she emphasized a strong labor market, which added over 370,000 new jobs in non-farm payroll in June, along with 3.6 unemployment rate at the near full employment. But at the same time, U.S. initial unemployment claims increased last week to 250,000, which is the highest in the last 8 months. Also, the majority of economists in markets and academics agrees that the recession possibility is higher. So overall, it is too early to say that U.S. economy is under recession because signals are mixed as of now. But it is true that U.S. economy is losing steam of economic recovery and becomes closer to the recession.
Professor Krosner, report from the Bank of America says that the US is going to have a mild recession in the second half of 2022. And some are now warning that there's going to be a double dip recession. What's your outlook?
So I think we're gradually going to see less economic activity, and so I think the unemployment rate is going to be moving up, and the labor market is starting. We have signs of it starting to weaken, and I think it is going to weaken. It is going to weaken further. Whether it'll be a formal recession or not, we'll have to see. There's a committee of people at the National Bureau of Economic Research who make the formal definition, make the formal call of whether it'll be a recession or not. They tend to focus a lot on the labor market, and so it'll really be a lot on how the labor market evolves. Right now, given how tight the labor market is, I wouldn't really call it a recession, and I don't think they would. If the unemployment rate starts to go above 5 or 6%, which may well happen by the beginning of next year, then I think that's a possibility, not a necessity.
And Professor Kim, well, turning our attention to the South Korean economy, which hasn't been faring so well, of course, with households in debt, surging levels of debt, and our own rate hikes being ongoing. And well, do you think the South Korean economy is also in danger of slipping into a recession? I mean, what kind of concerns should we have at this point?
Korean economy is expected to expand over 3% only this year, but as unfavorable external factors of higher oil price, war in Ukraine, and U.S. Fed's aggressive interest rate hikes go on, Korean government adjusted its this year's economic growth down to 2% level. We know that 1% economic growth decrease is a big drop. And then Bank of Korea should be keeping step with U.S. Fed interest rate hikes to avoid capital outflows from domestic market. But higher interest rate already gives negative impact on domestic consumption and investment. In the second quarter, Korean economy had a robust economic growth of 0.7% on quarter. But if we take a look at the details of it, we have some concerns. The strongest recovery momentum of Korean economy, the export is weakening due to China's slowdown and higher production cost. In the second half of this year, households' consumption, which sustains Korean economic growth, now just down to a much higher rate. Then Korean economy's expansion for this year could be declined to 1% level.
Right, we're sorry about the slight lapse in audio there. Professor Krosner, well, some believe that a mild and short-lived recession might actually do the US economy a bit of good, really slowing it down. But the cut in figures, though, it also impacts people's jobs and livelihoods. And do you think the pain really will lead to gain for the US economy? And if a recession does occur, then just how big will the fallout be?
For sure. I mean, I think the Fed understands that they would love to be able to avoid a recession. But as the chairman had said, it's very important to bring inflation down, because if we don't bring inflation down, we don't have a solid foundation for a long-term economic recovery. And so there may be need to have a short-term slowdown or even a recession in order to bring inflation down, in order to avoid what happened in the late 1970s or the 1980s, when inflation got so high and inflation expectations got so high, the Fed had lost credibility, that they needed to really crunch the economy in order to bring inflation down. I don't think we're in that situation. I think we can have hopefully a softish landing that is just a very slow growth for a few quarters rather than actual contraction. But I think workers will understand that although in the short run it may be painful, in the long run it's much better, because the jobs will come back more quickly and you don't get as sharp a recession as we did in the early 1980s.
And speaking of the softish landing, Professor Kim, Fed Chair Jerome Powell, he hinted that there could be a soft or softish landing for the US economy amid a series of rate increases. And well, what would be a soft landing, and what does he mean by softish?
I don't think we have an exact definition of softish landing, as we don't have it for recession. So we can interpret Mr. Powell's softish landing along with Finance Secretary recession, like evidences say that U.S. economy is better than the former recession for sure. One of the largest concerns of the U.S. Fed's operation to tame inflation would be serious recession or hard landing. Related to this, we can relatively describe the softish landing in data perspective. For example, U.S. economy is expected to grow over 2% for this year, but growth decreases down to 1% level. That would not be a softish landing. Or if labor market adds less than 200,000 payroll on month, that also would not be a softish landing, but a hard landing.
Well, Professor Krosner, now Mr. Powell said that he intends to bring the inflation rate back down to the 2% level. And well, what do you think the Fed's next steps are going to be to achieve that? Do you think they're going to start slowing their pace a little bit, or will they continue with their aggressive mode?
I think they're going to continue to tighten policy and raise interest rates, but I think it's unlikely that interest rate increases will be as high as they have been in these last two rate hikes. It's been 0.75 of a percentage point in each one. I think it's more likely that we're going to see some better numbers for headline inflation, because energy prices in the U.S. have come down a bit and some food prices have come down. Probably what will happen in September will most likely be 50 basis points, and then there are two more meetings for the rest of the year of 25 basis points each, 1/4 percentage point each, and that gets you to around 3.5%. Probably they will still need to go a little bit further than that, to I'd say 4% or so, because I think inflation is still going to be reasonably high. But I think they will keep interest rates there for a while. Markets are expecting that they're going to bring them back down very quickly. I don't think so. I think they're going to have to keep interest rates at around 4% or so for a while to make sure that inflation moves back down to their 2% target. That's not going to happen quickly. I think inflation will come down relatively quickly from the 8 or 9% level down to, let's say, a 4% level or so. But it's going to take a while to get back to the Fed's target of 2%.
And Professor Krosner, talking about the recession fears again, if there is a recession, then, how do you get out of one?
So that would be the Fed bringing interest rates back down, pivoting. So after they've wrung inflation out of the system, and after they've made sure that inflation expectations are well anchored around their 2% goal, they can start to bring interest rates back down. That provides more liquidity, that provides more funding opportunities. It makes it cheaper to borrow, whether it's to buy houses or to invest, and that would be one of the tools. Another tool will be on the fiscal side, more incentives for investments. So give better tax incentives for investment, and potentially some spending on different projects that may have a very good payoff for growth.
And Professor Kim, over here in South Korea, consumer sentiment is quite pessimistic. It's been going down for a couple of months, and many expect the economy is just going to get worse. So how should the Bank of Korea and also the government prepare for a soft landing for the Korean economy amid the continued monetary tightening that we're seeing, as well as slower export growth?
That is the tough question. But actually, since current Korean economic slowdown is generated by most of the foreign factors, Bank of Korea's and Korean government's policies won't be so effective. According to Bank of Korea's report in July, consumer sentiment fell to the lowest level in 21 months, and expected inflation hit a record high over 6% in July amid rising energy and commodity costs. It means that Korean consumers expect that monetary tightening and so many problems like energy prices soaring around the world would lead to a slowdown in Korean economy. Actually, major negative factors in consumer sentiment have been from foreign countries, as we talked about. So Korean government policies won't be so effective in controlling inflation and economic slowdown. But in this difficult situation, government and Bank of Korea should clearly set the policy priority between stabilizing inflation and economic recovery. And it is also necessary for government to explain current inflation situation to avoid rapid wage increase demand by workers.
Professor Krosner, as the US Fed continues to tighten its monetary policy, many emerging economies around the world are looking on with a bit of fear, really, and it does really trigger more concerns about the possibility of capital outflow. And what do you think about the situation? Do you think the Federal Reserve's officials are taking this into account as they continue to introduce rate hikes?
Well, certainly the Fed is aware of the international consequences of its actions, but the Fed, like all of their central banks, are created by their congresses or their diets to focus primarily on their domestic economies. So the Fed understands that as interest rates rise more in the U.S. than in other countries, that interest rate differential means that it's more attractive to invest in U.S. assets that'll have a higher rate of return than in assets elsewhere. That leads to capital inflows to the U.S. and outflows, particularly from some emerging markets, and that they take that into account in how that'll affect inflation, how that'll affect economic activity. But the primary focus will be on the U.S. Because that is its mandate. It's to focus on maximal employment growth consistent with low and stable inflation, and that is focused on the U.S. But it will have global consequences, and the Fed is aware of that.
Right, of course. And now that its recent decision is out, I'm sure many economies are now looking to the next one, and already the speculations are beginning. But thank you both so much for your time today. That was Randall Krosner, Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and Kim Se-won, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For a look at news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Let's start with monkeypox, as new infection figures have been announced by the World Health Organization.
That's right, Doyon. The total number of cases in the monkeypox outbreak has now reached 18,000. The Director General of the WHO, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, said on Wednesday that the cases had been seen across 78 countries. Now, he said 5 deaths from the disease were recorded in Africa, while 10% of all cases result in hospital admission. The WHO also said that 98% of cases outside of Africa were reported in men who have sex with men. But the WHO head also warned against the danger of stigma and discrimination and said that anyone exposed can be infected. Europe is seeing the lion's share of cases at 70%, while the Americas account for 25%. The WHO has recommended vaccinations for high-risk groups. In a bid to bring home a women's basketball star and a former Marine, the U.S. has offered a deal to Russia. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Wednesday that, quote, a substantial proposal to Moscow was made weeks ago for WNBA star Brittany Griner and ex-Marine Paul Whelan. Now, Blinken added that he expects to discuss a deal with his Kremlin counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, this week. It will be the first conversation between the ministers since Russia invaded Ukraine. The potential deal signals a policy reverse for the U.S., as the Justice Department usually opposes prisoner trades. The Biden administration has reportedly offered an exchange of Victor Bout, a convicted Russian arms trafficker, as part of a potential exchange deal. Iraq's parliamentary building was breached on Wednesday by hundreds of demonstrators protesting the nomination of a new prime minister. Supporters of populist Shia leader Muqtada al-Sadr stormed the building following the nomination of Mohammed Shia al-Sadan by Shiite Coordination Framework, a pro-Iran alliance. The nomination came as al-Sadr's parliamentary bloc resigned en masse last month in the wake of an extended political stalemate. As of Wednesday, Iraq had entered a record of 290 days without a head of state or cabinet since elections last October, mainly owing to infighting between Shiite and Kurdish lawmaker groups. Political uncertainty has left Iraq without a budget for 2022, hampering spending on essential infrastructure projects. And in our final story, a large 170-carat pink diamond has been discovered in Angola. Dubbed Lulo Rose, the rose-colored diamond is believed to be the largest gemstone of its kind found in some 300 years. The gem was found at the Lulo Alluvial Diamond Mine, according to mine owner Lucapa Diamond Company on Wednesday. The mine itself is a hotbed for large gemstones, producing 2 of the largest diamonds ever found in Angola. Among the 27 diamonds over 100 carats found at the mine, Lulo Rose is the 5th largest. Pink diamonds are very rare, occurring only once in every 10,000 diamonds.
Good morning. The intense heat wave scorching much of Korea continues with heat alerts in place, but the heat wave warning has been lifted in Daegu and surrounding regions with slight relief from the heat yesterday. And today should not be that bad either, with passing rain in the forecast for that area. 5 to 40 millimeters are in the forecast, and when it does rain, it could come along with thunder and lightning. Now, the capital region in Jeju Island had a tropical night. Elsewhere is waking up to morning temperatures that are similar to the same time yesterday. Western regions will be hotter today, though, with a high of 34 degrees Celsius over in Gwangju, Daegu topping out at 31 degrees this afternoon. And we'll continue to sweat through a blistering heat wave day and night for the next couple of weeks. I know it has only been a few hours since we got out of bed here in Korea, but here are some ways to sleep better during the heat wave. While eating heavy or spicy food with beer at night is not such a great idea around this time if you want to sleep well. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up our newscast for this hour. We'll be back tomorrow, though, for our Friday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks very much for joining us this morning, and do tune into Arirang News for updates throughout the day. Have a lovely evening. Sorry, have a lovely day or evening wherever you are. Getting ahead of myself there. Goodbye.